The morning Seattle mist clung to Jessica Thompson's weathered Toyota Camry as she pulled into her usual parking spot outside Emerald Street Coffee. The car, a decade-old model with slight paint fade on the hood, looked oddly out of place among the gleaming luxury vehicles that typically lined the upscale downtown district. But Jessica preferred it that way. The familiar scratch on the passenger door reminded her of her first research breakthrough, when she'd been too excited about her discovery to notice the yellow parking pole. Today, she wore her favorite pair of well-worn jeans, scattered with tiny holes from kneeling in her rooftop greenhouse. Her cream-colored cashmere sweater, a subtle indulgence she allowed herself, was partially hidden under a practical gardening apron. The morning had been spent tending to her prized collection of rare Himalayan plants, potential game-changers in her latest medical research project. As she fed the parking meter, Jessica's mind wandered to the molecular patterns she'd observed in her newest specimen. The plant, discovered in a remote valley in Nepal, showed promising signs of natural compounds that could revolutionize neurological treatments. She barely noticed when her platinum credit card slipped from her wallet, landing silently on the sidewalk. "Ma'am, your time's up," a sharp voice cut through her thoughts. Jessica looked up to find Parker Williams, the newly appointed parking attendant, holding his digital ticket machine with an air of authority. His crisp uniform and eager expression suggested he was determined to make an impression on his first week on the job. "I just paid for 2 hours," Jessica replied softly, gesturing toward the meter's digital display, showing 159.45 remaining. The smell of fresh coffee from the cafe mingled with the morning air as curious onlookers slowed their pace to observe the interaction. "According to my records, this vehicle has been here since 7 a.m., Parker insisted, his tablet displaying a different timestamp. Jessica checked her watch, a simple Timex that had survived countless laboratory experiments. It was only 8:45 a.m. She had arrived barely 5 minutes ago. "There must be a mistake," she said, reaching for her phone to show her parking receipt. "I just arrived from my greenhouse on Westlake Avenue." The phone, containing encrypted data worth billions from her latest research, was housed in a battered case held together with medical tape. Parker's eyes narrowed at her casual appearance and the car's condition. "Listen, if you can't afford the fine, there's a payment plan available." His voice carried that particular tone of assumed authority, mixed with condescension that made the corner of Jessica's mouth twitch slightly, not in anger, but in familiar recognition of yet another misguided judgment. What Parker couldn't know was that Jessica Thompson had just declined a $3 billion buyout offer from a major pharmaceutical company that morning. The plant she'd been tending in her greenhouse held the key to a revolutionary neural pathway discovery, something that could transform millions of lives. Her worn jeans had soil stains from handling specimens worth more than the entire city block. "I'll take the ticket," she said calmly, extending her hand. A young barista from the coffee shop, who had been watching the scene unfold, nearly dropped her tray of artisanal lattes when she noticed the distinctive black diamond ring on Jessica's finger. A ring featured in last month's Forbes profile of America's most innovative entrepreneurs. But Parker was already printing the citation, missing both the ring and the platinum card still lying on the sidewalk, its Neurotech CEO inscription catching the morning light. The King County Courthouse buzzed with morning activity as Jessica Thompson walked through the metal detectors. Her gardening jeans and casual sweater stood in stark contrast to the sea of pressed suits and polished shoes that filled the marble hallway. The security guard, Mike Davidson, who had worked there for 20 years, automatically pointed her toward the public defender's office before she could speak. "I'm here for traffic court, room 412, Jessica said with a gentle smile, holding up her citation. Mike blinked, noticing her perfect diction and the quiet confidence in her stance that seemed at odds with her casual appearance. He'd seen thousands of people pass through these doors, but something about her made him pause. The elevator ride to the 4th floor was an exercise in invisible boundaries. 3 lawyers in expensive suits unconsciously shifted away from Jessica, clustering around their leather briefcases while discussing their million-dollar cases. One of them, engrossed in his phone, was actually reading a Neurotech press release about their groundbreaking neural interface patent, completely unaware that the inventor stood beside him. Room 412 hummed with nervous energy. Jessica took a seat in the back, pulling out her notebook, a custom-made leather journal with pages specifically designed for molecular diagrams. As she waited, she sketched the chemical structure of her latest discovery, the complex circles and lines flowing effortlessly across the page. All rise. The Honorable Judge Robert Anderson presiding. The bailiff's voice boomed through the courtroom. Judge Anderson swept in, his black robes crisp and his reputation for stern justice preceding him. His eyes scanned the room with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd seen it all, or thought he had. Cases moved quickly. Speeding tickets, parking violations, minor traffic infractions. Each defendant's story blurred into the next until the clerk called out, "Case number 247. Jessica Thompson, parking violation." Jessica walked to the defendant's table with measured steps. Judge Anderson glanced up briefly, then did a double take at her casual attire. His eyes narrowed slightly. He was used to people showing more deference to his courtroom, at least in their dress. "Miss Thompson," he began, emphasizing the Ms. with a slight edge, "you're contesting a parking violation from—" He shuffled the papers. "This morning." "Yes, Your Honor," Jessica replied, her voice carrying the same measured tone she used in boardroom presentations. "I have evidence that the parking meter system malfunctioned, showing incorrect timestamps." Judge Anderson cut her off mid-sentence, something he'd never dared do in the presence of the power suits that usually graced his courtroom. "Miss Thompson, this court's time is valuable. The citation clearly shows." "If I may, Your Honor," Jessica continued smoothly, reaching into her well-worn canvas bag. The bailiff tensed slightly, then froze as she withdrew not just her phone, but also a small device no bigger than a credit card. It was a prototype Neurotech diagnostic tool, worth more than the entire courthouse's annual budget, that she'd absent-mindedly slipped into her bag that morning. The young law clerk, Emma Sullivan, who had interned at a tech law firm last summer, suddenly sat up straighter. She recognized the device from a confidential patent filing that had created a buzz throughout the legal technology sector. Her eyes darted between Jessica and the device, pieces of a puzzle rapidly falling into place. But Judge Anderson, focused on maintaining his courtroom's efficiency, saw only what he expected to see: another citizen trying to avoid a simple fine. His gavel hand twitched with impatience, unaware that he was about to create a moment that would redefine his entire career. Judge Anderson leaned forward on his bench, the morning light from the tall courthouse windows casting shadows across his stern features. The small device in Jessica's hand caught a glint of sunlight, sending a prismatic scatter across the courtroom's wooden panels. "Miss Thompson," he said, emphasizing each syllable with growing irritation, "regardless of what that gadget might show, the city's parking system is legally binding. The fine stands at $250. He paused, noting her unfazed expression. "In fact, given your apparent disregard for this court's time, I'm doubling the fine to $500. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Jessica remained perfectly still, her posture reflecting years of negotiations in high-stakes boardrooms. She slipped the prototype back into her bag, then retrieved her phone. The same one that had received a $900 million acquisition offer just yesterday. "Your Honor," Jessica began, her voice carrying the same quiet authority that had convinced Silicon Valley's biggest investors to back her ventures, "I respect this court's time immensely. That's precisely why I've brought conclusive evidence." She held up her phone, displaying a screen that showed more than just a parking receipt. The young law clerk, Emma, nearly dropped her pen. The interface on Jessica's phone wasn't the standard parking app. It was Neurotech's proprietary system, the same one being considered for integration into the city's infrastructure. Emma had read about it in a confidential brief just last week. Judge Anderson's jaw tightened. In his 20 years on the bench, he'd developed a knack for reading people. Designer suits usually meant guilty pleas and quick settlements. Casual attire typically preceded lengthy excuses, but something about Jessica's calm demeanor disrupted his usual patterns. Your Honor, the timestamp discrepancy occurred due to a known software conflict between the old parking meters and the new digital system being tested in that zone. Jessica's explanation was precise, technical, and delivered with the ease of someone who understood municipal infrastructure at a level far beyond the average citizen. The bailiff, intrigued by the exchange, found himself stepping closer to get a better look at Jessica's phone display. His movement caught Judge Anderson's attention, adding to the judge's growing irritation at losing control of his normally efficient courtroom. Ms. Thompson, the judge's voice rose slightly. This court isn't interested in technical explanations about parking meters. The fine is now $750, and I suggest you pay it before it increases further. He reached for his gavel, ready to end what he saw as a waste of valuable court time. Jessica calmly opened her well-worn leather wallet. The judge's eyes narrowed, expecting to see someone scramble to gather enough cash or plead for a payment plan. Instead, his gaze fixed on something that made him pause mid-motion. Peeking from her wallet was a distinctive platinum card that even he recognized, one issued only to individuals whose net worth exceeded 10 figures. It was the same card his brother, an investment banker, had once shown him in awe, explaining that fewer than 50 people in the country possessed one. The courtroom fell silent. Emma, the clerk, was frantically typing something into her computer, her eyes widening at whatever she'd just discovered. The bailiff had unconsciously straightened his posture, a gesture typically reserved for visiting dignitaries. But Jessica simply stood there, holding her wallet with the same relaxed grip she'd used earlier that morning while examining multi-million-dollar plant specimens in her greenhouse. Her expression remained unchanged, patient, composed, and carrying just a hint of something that might have been amusement in the corner of her mouth. Emma Sullivan's fingers flew across her keyboard, the quiet tapping drawing curious glances from the courtroom gallery. The young clerk's eyes widened as her screen filled with search results. There it was, the Forbes cover from last month. Jessica Thompson, the quiet revolutionary behind Neurotech's trillion-dollar breakthrough. The image on Emma's screen showed the same woman who stood before them now, though dressed differently for the photo shoot. In the magazine, Jessica wore a simple black turtleneck, her expression thoughtful as she held a glowing neural interface prototype. The article's subtitle read, "How a Brilliant Mind Transformed a Rooftop Greenhouse Experiment into America's Most Valuable Private Company." Judge Anderson, still focused on maintaining his authority, reached for his gavel. "Miss Thompson, if you're ready to pay the $750 fine." Emma's hand shot up, trembling slightly. "Your Honor, She hesitated, protocol warring with urgency. The bailiff noticed her unusual behavior and stepped closer to her desk, glancing at her screen. His sharp intake of breath drew the judge's attention. Jessica remained perfectly still, her platinum card catching the morning light. She slipped it back into her wallet, trading it for her checkbook, bound in the same rare leather used in luxury car interiors. The simple action carried none of the anxiety typically displayed by defendants facing steep fines. "One moment, Your Honor," the bailiff interrupted, his voice unusually strained. He hurried to the bench, whispering something in Judge Anderson's ear. The judge's expression shifted subtly, confusion, disbelief, then something approaching shock. The courtroom watched in fascinated silence as Judge Anderson's complexion changed from authoritative pink to an uncomfortable pale. His eyes darted to his own computer screen, where he'd hastily pulled up a search window. The headlines flashed before him. Neurotech CEO declines $3 billion buyout offer. Thompson's neural interface patents valued at $50 billion. Silicon Valley's quietest billionaire revolutionizes brain science. Jessica stood patiently, her fingers absently tracing the edge of her checkbook. The same fingers that had just that morning handled plants worth millions in research potential now waited to write a $750 check that amounted to less than what her company earned in interest every minute. A young intern in the back row suddenly gasped, pointing at his phone screen where CNBC was running a breaking news story. Neurotech stock soars on FDA fast-track approval. Market cap exceeds $800 billion. The timestamp showed it had happened just minutes ago, while Jessica had been standing in this very courtroom. Judge Anderson cleared his throat, his earlier confidence evaporating. "Miss Thompson, I believe there may have been some." He paused, searching for words that could salvage his dignity. Confusion about the parking system's accuracy. The corner of Jessica's mouth twitched slightly, not in triumph, but in familiar recognition of a pattern she'd seen countless times before. She pulled out her favorite pen, the same one she used to sign her first billion-dollar deal. Emma watched in awe as Jessica began writing the check, her movements unhurried and deliberate. The amount she was about to pay wouldn't even register as a rounding error in her company's petty cash account, yet the moment felt monumental in its quiet significance. Outside the courthouse, Seattle's afternoon sun broke through the morning clouds, illuminating a growing crowd of reporters who had somehow caught wind of the morning's events. Jessica stepped through the heavy bronze doors, her posture relaxed despite the sudden flurry of camera flashes. "Miss Thompson, is it true about the parking ticket?" shouted a reporter from the Seattle Times, his press badge swinging wildly as he pushed forward. Another voice cut through the chaos. "Did Judge Anderson really double the fine without hearing your evidence?" Jessica paused on the courthouse steps, her canvas bag, containing technology worth millions, slung casually over her shoulder. The same peaceful smile she'd worn in the courtroom remained, unwavering. A sleek black Tesla pulled up to the curb, her assistant Michael stepping out with a concerned expression. "Miss Thompson, your 2 p.m. presentation to the board." Michael began, holding up his tablet displaying a calendar packed with billion-dollar meetings. Jessica held up her hand gently. "The board can wait 10 minutes, Michael." She turned to face the gathered press, her voice carrying easily across the courthouse plaza without having to raise it. Years of keynote speeches and investor presentations had taught her the power of composed delivery. "This morning was a reminder that our justice system faces many challenges," she began, as smartphones rose to record her words. "But it's also an opportunity. Neurotech will be announcing a new initiative next week, focusing on modernizing urban infrastructure, including parking systems." Behind her, the courthouse doors burst open again. Judge Anderson emerged, his face flushed, flanked by court administrators. "Miss Thompson," he called out, his earlier authoritative tone replaced by something approaching desperation. "Perhaps we could discuss this matter in my chambers." Jessica turned slightly, acknowledging him with a small nod. "Thank you, Your Honor, but the fine has been paid." She reached into her bag and pulled out something unexpected, a business card made of recycled paper. "However, I'd love to have you attend next month's Technology Summit. We're discussing AI applications in judicial systems." The gathered crowd watched in fascination as the powerful judge accepted the simple card like it was made of gold. A tech blogger in the crowd live-tweeted the moment, his post instantly going viral. "Just watched a billionaire CEO hand a business card to the judge who fined her, while wearing gardening jeans. Boss move level. Legendary." Michael checked his phone and smiled. "Miss Thompson, Neurotech stock just jumped 3% on rumors about the urban infrastructure announcement." Jessica nodded, then turned back to the press. "If you'll excuse me, I have some plants waiting in my greenhouse that could help millions of people." She started walking toward the Tesla, then stopped. "Oh, and about that parking ticket." She smiled. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come with a price tag. As she moved through the crowd, a young girl pushed forward, holding a science textbook. "Miss Thompson, I'm doing my science project on neural interfaces. Could you?" Without hesitation, Jessica stopped. The waiting board members, the press, the flustered judge, all faded into the background as she knelt down to the girl's level, gardening jeans and all, ready to inspire another young mind. From the courthouse steps, Judge Anderson watched the scene unfold, the simple business card heavy in his hand, its recycled paper carrying the weight of missed assumptions and valuable lessons learned. The next morning, every major network carried the story. On Rise and Shine America, host Taylor Bennett stood in front of a split screen showing Jessica's Forbes cover photo beside a courthouse security camera still of her in gardening jeans. In a story that's captivating the nation, Taylor began, Billionaire CEO Jessica Thompson showed up to traffic court dressed like she'd just left her garden, because she had. The screen shifted to footage of Jessica's rooftop greenhouse, where rare plants worth millions swayed gently in the morning breeze. But here's the twist, Taylor continued. Those jeans weren't a publicity stunt. Our investigation reveals Miss Thompson spends every morning personally tending to experimental plants that could revolutionize medicine. She drove there in a 10-year-old Toyota, not for show, but because she was too excited about a breakthrough to care about buying a new car. Inside her penthouse office, Jessica sat at a simple wooden desk she built herself, watching the coverage on mute while examining plant samples through a microscope. Michael, her assistant, rushed in with a tablet displaying social media metrics. "Ma'am, you're trending worldwide. #gardening senator is viral, though that's technically incorrect since you're not a senator." He paused, scrolling through updates. "And there's a waiting list for Neurotech's summer internship program. Over 50,000 applications since yesterday." Jessica looked up from her microscope, her eyes bright with interest. "How many of those applicants are young women from underserved areas?" "Nearly 40%, Michael replied. "They're calling you the billionaire next door on social media. Your gardening jeans are spawning fashion trends, and..." He chuckled. "Luxury car dealers are reporting a drop in sales as CEOs suddenly discovered the joy of driving modest vehicles." The wall-mounted screens in her office displayed various news channels, all running different angles of the story. CNBC analyzed Neurotech's soaring stock price. Fox Business discussed the impact on judicial reform. CNN featured interviews with young entrepreneurs inspired by her authenticity. A notification popped up on Jessica's phone. Judge Anderson's office requesting a meeting. Next to it, an alert about someone trying to sell authentic Jessica Thompson gardening jeans on eBay for $50,000. "Michael," she said, turning back to her microscope, "remind me to send Judge Anderson our research on AI-assisted judicial systems, and maybe a pair of gardening gloves." She smiled, adjusting the microscope's focus. "The expensive kind, under $10. The elevator dinged, and Emma Sullivan, the court clerk from yesterday, stepped into the office. She'd accepted Jessica's impromptu job offer to join Neurotech's legal team, trading her courthouse desk for a chance to help reshape technology law. "Miss Thompson," Emma began, then corrected herself as Jessica had insisted. "Jessica, the Today Show wants to film a segment in your greenhouse. They're particularly interested in the plant that sparked your first patent." Jessica nodded, making a final adjustment to her microscope. "Tell them yes, but only if they'll also cover our new scholarship program for young scientists." She looked up, her expression brightening. "Actually, Emma, would you like to handle the interview? I think it's time for fresh voices to tell our story." As Emma stood there stunned, Michael's tablet chimed again. Update. Judge Anderson just announced a complete overhaul of his courthouse's approach to preliminary hearings. He's quoted as saying, "Sometimes the most valuable evidence isn't what we see, but what we fail to see." The lights of Times Square blazed against the evening sky as Jessica Thompson's image appeared on the massive screens. She sat across from acclaimed host Rebecca Morgan on Evening Spotlight, wearing her trademark casual style. This time, a simple blue sweater and dark jeans. "So, Jessica," Rebecca began, leaning forward in her chair, "you could have pursued legal action, demanded an apology, even called for the judge's resignation. Instead, you're here announcing a $50 million investment in modernizing America's civic infrastructure. Why? Jessica's response carried the same quiet confidence she'd shown in the courtroom. Innovation isn't just about creating new technology, Rebecca. It's about solving real problems that affect everyday lives. The studio screens behind them displayed renderings of Neurotech's new smart city initiatives. These systems, Jessica continued, gesturing to the images, used the same neural network technology we developed for medical applications. But instead of mapping brain patterns, they'll map city patterns, traffic flow, parking systems, emergency response times. Rebecca picked up a sleek device from the table between them. And this is the prototype. Yes, Jessica smiled. That small device can process more data in a second than most city systems handle in a month. But the real breakthrough isn't the technology, it's the accessibility. We're making it available to every city, regardless of their budget. The camera panned to show the studio audience, where several mayors and city planners sat mesmerized. Among them was Judge Anderson, who had flown in specifically for this announcement. Speaking of accessibility, Rebecca shifted topics. Let's talk about the Jessica Thompson Foundation's new initiatives. You're not just investing in cities. The screens changed to show images of young students in laboratories. Every great innovation starts with curiosity, Jessica explained, her eyes lighting up. We're establishing research grants for students from all backgrounds. Special focus on young minds who might not have traditional advantages but possess extraordinary potential. The camera caught Judge Anderson nodding thoughtfully, his expression a mix of admiration and lingering embarrassment. And the greenhouse tours? Rebecca prompted. I hear there's a 2-year waiting list. Jessica laughed softly. We've opened our research facilities to school groups. Every child who visits gets their own plant to nurture. Some of these kids might develop the next breakthrough medicine or solve major environmental challenges. They just need someone to believe in them. The host held up her tablet, displaying social media reactions. Your hashtag Innovate with Kindness is trending worldwide. Companies are adopting similar approaches. Some are calling it the Thompson effect, success without sacrificing humanity. Labels aren't important, Jessica responded, adjusting her simple watch, the same Timex she'd worn to court. What matters is impact. Every person has value, regardless of their appearance or circumstances. Sometimes the greatest opportunities come disguised as ordinary moments. As the interview concluded, Rebecca revealed one final surprise. The studio screens showed live feeds from 50 different cities, where mayors were simultaneously announcing their participation in Neurotech's Smart City initiative. Judge Anderson stood with the audience in applause, the same business card Jessica had handed him still in his wallet. But now it carried a different weight. Not of regret, but of inspiration. Backstage after the interview, a young production assistant nervously approached Jessica. Miss Thompson, my sister dreams of being a scientist, but our family can't afford. Before she could finish, Jessica was already reaching for her phone. Tell me about your sister, she said warmly. And let's make that dream a reality. 1 year later, the Seattle skyline sparkled under a crisp autumn morning. The newly completed Thompson Innovation Center stood across from the courthouse, its living walls covered in experimental plants that could revolutionize urban air purification. Through the glass entrance, a simple plaque read, "Every breakthrough begins with being seen." Inside her rooftop greenhouse, Jessica knelt in her favorite gardening jeans, examining a rare flowering plant. The specimen, discovered by one of her scholarship students, showed promise in treating memory disorders. Her old Toyota Camry sat in its usual spot below, now accompanied by a row of similar modest vehicles, other executives following her lead in choosing substance over flash. The elevator chimed, and Emma Sullivan stepped out, no longer the nervous court clerk but now Neurotech's confident director of legal innovation. The judge is here for the ceremony, she announced, trying not to smile too broadly. And you might want to see this. Jessica stood, brushing soil from her jeans, and followed Emma to the observation deck. Below, a crowd had gathered outside the courthouse. Judge Anderson stood at a podium, his posture notably different from a year ago. More mindful, less rigid. Beside him, a row of screens displayed live feeds from courthouses across the country. Today marks the full implementation of the Thompson Initiative for Judicial Innovation, the judge announced, his voice carrying across the plaza. Thanks to Neurotex's AI systems, our courts now process cases with unprecedented efficiency and fairness. But more importantly, he paused, looking up at the Innovation Center. We've learned to look beyond surface appearances. The screen showed statistics. Case processing times reduced by 70%, wrongful judgments down by 85%, public trust in the judicial system up by 60%. But the most striking number showed zero. The number of cases dismissed due to economic or social bias in the past 6 months. Michael appeared with Jessica's tablet, displaying more updates. The scholarship program had expanded to 500 students, with the first class of young scientists already making breakthrough discoveries. The gardening genes trend had evolved into a global movement celebrating authentic leadership. Even luxury car sales remained down as CEOs discovered the liberation of choosing function over status. "Miss Thompson," a small voice called. A young girl in a lab coat stood near the greenhouse entrance, one of the students from last year's first tour group. "We replicated your plant growth experiment in our school science lab. Look." She held up a thriving specimen in a recycled container. Jessica's eyes lit up with genuine interest. She was about to respond when Judge Anderson's voice rose again from below. "And so," he concluded, "we dedicate this new AI-assisted judicial system to the person who taught us that true justice, like true innovation, sees beyond appearances. Ms. Thompson couldn't be here today because," he chuckled, looking up at the greenhouse, "she's probably gardening." The crowd laughed, then applauded as the new system officially went online. Screens around the plaza showed the AI processing its first cases, each decision marked by unprecedented transparency and fairness. Jessica turned to the young student, completely uninterested in the ceremony celebrating her impact. "Tell me about your experiment," she said, kneeling down to examine the plant. "What inspired your approach?" As the girl excitedly explained her methodology, Emma and Michael exchanged knowing looks. This was Jessica Thompson, billionaire, innovator, legend, choosing to spend a historic moment doing what she loved most, nurturing new growth, whether in plants or people. The old parking meter that started it all still stood outside the courthouse, now upgraded with Neurotex's latest AI system. On its display, a simple message rotated: every space has value. Every person has potential.